Hello, and thank you for checking out the Littrell Show for service and hospitality entrepreneurs. I'm Jason, and here are the stories for Friday, February 26th. How to use data to equitably distribute $1.9 trillion. New Yorkers are hesitant to get out and eat these days. Tips drop with optional COVID-19 surcharge, and the impact of a $15 minimum wage for tipped workers. All right, the first story comes from Fast Company, and the headline reads, "The $1.9 trillion relief bill is only a start. Here's how to ensure it's distributed equitably." So amazing use of data. This story is about an amazing use of data to help the right people with the right stimulus relief, which the government typically needs a lot of help with. So it goes on to quote Joe DiStefano from Urban Footprint as saying, "The real challenge here is about the distribution of this crisis. It's not the scale, it's the distribution and the very uneven distribution of these challenges across the landscape." Urban Footprint is a data mapping platform which helps understand exactly what's happening. It's very, very much like how they calculated the votes in the election. Like you could see each county had a specific amount of votes, and so that's what this company does, is collect data and distribute it. So let's see here. So he goes on to say, COVID has laid bare some pretty deep endemic inequities in our society related to resource distribution over the past decades and generations, no doubt. This isn't some multi-million-dollar, multi-year process to invent this kind of data, Joe DiStefano says. This data exists, and it's specifically what we've been building, and it can be used today, tomorrow, for this round of resource distribution and the next. And he goes on to say that some of the most vulnerable are not going to raise their hand for aid. They're probably not going to even know that it exists. This is super powerful. And he goes on to say that so states are going to have to go to court and target these people in proactive campaigns. What that does is help to design better interventions, design better outreach campaigns so that people know about help, and ultimately to track the effectiveness of interventions. So if we can track down to the neighborhood level where the eviction risk is the greatest, then we can target limited resources to prevent eviction. This is so powerful. I'm sorry, this is me talking now. This isn't Joe DiStefano anymore, but this is so powerful because what happens is they say, here's a ton of money to solve this big problem that we have, but the qualification of the distribution is terrible. I mean, the USBG suffered this too when they were just like, here's a bunch of money that we're giving out, but they didn't know who to give it to or how to give it to them, so it created this huge bottleneck. So hopefully this data will be used in a smart way to actually distribute the aid in a way that's meaningful to the people that need it the most when they need it the most. This is just very, very powerful stuff. Okay, so the next story is, are New Yorkers ready to go out for dinner? And this comes from marketplace.org. Starting Friday, restaurants will be allowed to seat diners indoors at 35% capacity. So that's today. So 35% today in New York. This is a quote from Andrew Ridgey from the New York City Hospitality Alliance that pre-pandemic, it was tough enough to survive when they had 100% occupancy and a good economy. And now 35% is not enough. So many restaurateurs say that they need at least 50%. This is a little side note from me, is that even at 50%, like he was saying, like 100% capacity, there was still a massive failure rate in bars and restaurants in New York, and generally speaking in the industry. So 35%, thank you. 50%, maybe. 100% is still a little dicey. So hopefully this will change soon. So the story goes on to quote a University of Miami researcher named Arun Sharma. He was talking about movie theaters that they have opened, but they're not getting the crowds they were expected, and that was mostly because the movies right now kind of suck, and most people are reluctant to go out to the movies anyways. So another researcher named Alex Suskind at Cornell University studies restaurant industry, and he believes that age groups who love their food delivery apps may feel less pressure to go out. That was happening before COVID, but he goes on to say that I think that millennials and the Gen Z folks are going to be slower to coming back to restaurants, and folks like me, and he's a Gen Xer, and to the boomers, we miss restaurants, Susskind said. But they go on to quote another 51-year-old Amanda Whitten from Brooklyn, and she says that there's no way she's going to go out for a bite or a drink or a flick until she gets vaccinated against COVID-19. And she's quoted as saying, "I know people who've had it, who last spring, who still haven't gotten lung function back all the way. So she's just not willing to roll the dice." So that's a couple different perspectives, from younger to medium to older. Actually, 51 isn't that old, guys. But it's interesting how people think about this. Generally speaking, the confidence is a little bit lower than we would have expected it to be this time. Okay, so the next story is from Eater. You can always trust Eater because they really have the restaurateurs in mind. So their headline reads, dozens of New York City restaurant workers saw drops in tips after COVID-19 surcharge. And this is from a survey that they conducted. So the bullet points on this story are the startling figures based on weird response to mask enforcement, like usual, are disproportionately negative to people of color. That's my own commentary there. So the survey involved 344 people from New York City and 450 people from New York State. The people from the city were from last week, or the last week in February, and then the 450 workers that were surveyed were from the New York State between October 6th and November 10th. So those were, every week it's different, so it's kind of wildly different perspectives. I would say that's a kind of an ambiguous data source, but so the story goes on to read that in New York City, 35% of the workers surveyed said that their restaurants had adopted the surcharge, and 57% of those workers said that their tips had declined as a result. Many of the workers surveyed reported confusion among diners who believed that the surcharge was going towards covering staffers' salaries, when in reality the surcharge can be applied to whatever cost the restaurant owner deems fit. Among the workers who reported a decline in tips, 43% said that the decline was 25% or more. So these are really sucky numbers, and it's really difficult because it really is a public education issue, and left to our own devices, we typically, as a society, make selfish decisions. So what that means is that if a bar or restaurant decided to charge a surcharge for COVID, then they could just put that in their pockets and pay themselves with it, or buy PPP or whatever. But hopefully they did the right thing. But the point is that people were confused about what the money was for. And so they thought it was they thought it was effectively a tip, which sucks. The story continues on to read that this additional decline comes on top of employees already seeing their tips drop after the start of COVID-19 pandemic last year, or according to the report. 59% of all restaurant workers surveyed indicated that their tips had declined since the start of the pandemic. And the problem was even more acute for Black restaurant workers, who said that 75% of whom reported that their tips had declined by 50% or more. So that's more of them and a bigger impact. Why is that? So that's a really difficult statistic to hear, because it's like, and this is only of the people that were employed, by the way. We lost hundreds of thousands of jobs, or like 140,000 jobs or so. The story continues to read that the decline in tips can largely be attributed to restaurant workers having to enforce COVID-19 safety guidelines, according to the report. 65% of the workers surveyed reported that they lost tips after asking people to wear masks or attempting to enforce social distancing. The issue was once again more acute for Black workers, who said that 71% of whom reported a drop in tips after trying to enforce safety measures. I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. So apparently, by trying to keep themselves and their peers safe, by asking people to wear masks, they not only were restaurant workers, generally speaking, dinged for that, but more Black people than everybody else. So I don't know. This racism is very much alive. The next story comes from the Wall Street Journal, and the headline reads, "What Biden's minimum wage plan means for restaurant workers." And so I'm just going to go ahead and quote the story here. The plan under consideration in Congress would lift the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour from the current level of $7.25 an hour for all workers that has been in place since 2009. That's like an eternity ago. The proposal would also eliminate the sub-minimum wage as little as $2.13 an hour for millions of workers, such as servers or bartenders who receive tips. Both changes would be phased in over several years. This is something that people just don't get, is that it's not going to be an overnight change. It's going to take several years to do that. So the story continues to write that the pay floors, the pay floors are going to change over time. So the federal minimum wage, which applies to most workers, would reach $15 an hour in 2025, and the tipped minimum wage would reach $14.95 in 2026. So it's in 5 years from now, guys. Under the proposal by Democrats, which both wages would be the same and adjusted annually. So nearly all full-service restaurants surveyed in the National Restaurant Association said they would raise menu prices if tipped wages were eliminated and the tipped minimum wage goes up. And that's a survey of 2,000 workers released last week. Two-thirds said that they would rely more on technology to reduce labor, and 88% said that they would cut hours. So while the minimum wage increase put upward pressure on menu prices, the effect is less dramatic than some in the restaurant industry predicts, says Sylvia Allegretto, a PhD labor economist at the University of California in Berkeley. Her prediction is that it's going to be a 0.56% increase in restaurant prices for every 10% increase in the minimum wage on average, and that's according to her studies. So the CBO, or the Congressional Budget Office, earlier this month said that raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025 could deliver raises for up to 27 million workers and lift 900,000 Americans above the poverty threshold. But the counterpoint to that is that it would cost 1.4 million jobs. So just a reminder about the New York City Hospitality Alliance is hosting a Mayoral candidate forum on March 3rd at 4 o'clock. Check out the show notes for the link to that information. For story ideas, comments, errors, and omissions, please send a message to Jason Littrell on any social media platform, wherever you're seeing this, or email podcast@jlittrell.com. All articles are property of their original publishers, so please be sure to check out the show notes for links to the source articles. Head to our Facebook group, Service and Hospitality Entrepreneurs on Facebook, to join the discussion, or to search for Jason Littrell on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Clubhouse. And definitely subscribe to The Littrell Show wherever you get your podcasts. I've been Jason Littrell, and I will see you next time. All right, people are always like, why do you do this in your closet? I'm like, well, because it sounds good in there. It's all right. Is the news good? Let me know.